Hey, liberal. Good to see you again. Today I thought we'd talk about why we humans always tend to break down into liberals and conservatives. Should we really be trying to defeat each other? Social scientists are pretty much unanimous now that there are actually conservative brains and liberal brains. Here's Jonathan Haidt to put it in a nutshell.
So the fundamental thing that I learned from Paul Rozin is to see us as these amazing omnivores. This is part of our survival strategy, even more than other apes. We are just brilliant omnivores. And we have the omnivore's dilemma, which is we've got to be interested in all kinds of new stuff. We're not tied to any place. We can roam onto a whole new continent. So we're interested in stuff. But stuff has all kinds of toxins and microbes. So we have to be careful about that stuff. And so these motives have to be intention. And this is actually an interesting way to understand the left-right difference. You have to have both motives.
The omnivore's dilemma. I love it. In order to survive in the world that shaped us, our ancestors needed to be both open to new experiences and cautious about the dangers that go along with them. Over time, we developed a rough binary. People who would habitually venture into the unknown, and people who would tend to pull back and retrench. Our ancestors lived in small groups. These types must have been influencing one another. Successful strategies over time become traditions. Conservatives tend to trust the accrued wisdom of the ages. Liberals not so much. No, you liberals trust the accrued wisdom of, like, the last 6 months. I'm kidding you, but let's face it. If something is new, you're biased toward it, if only for the sense of adventure. Conservatives, on the other hand, are born skeptics. They are likely to look at something new, particularly a new belief, as most probably wrong. Our motto over here is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Before I go any further, let me say that when I refer to liberals and conservatives, I am excluding the extremes of both the right and the left. This conversation is for people who accept that others can see the world differently from themselves and still be decent human beings. Also, I understand that there are many specific issues about which the two sides disagree, and I'll get to them one by one in this series. But my sense is that they are all rooted in the basic divide Professor Haidt talks about, the strong instinct toward change butting up against the equally strong instinct toward the tried and true. Just last night I hung out with one of my best friends. She's pretty much a textbook liberal. I used to think I was too, but finally had to admit that I'm really a conservative. We disagree on virtually everything political and have nevertheless collaborated on hundreds of projects. A few years ago we were talking about this stuff. I said, let me put it to you this way. If liberals are the dancers, conservatives are the floor. The point is that in order for there to be any successful cultural experimentation, there has to be a well-understood structure upon which to experiment. Working in the home trades for 35 years, I came to understand that there are the cosmetics of a house, its colors and furnishings, the creative expressions of the current occupant, and then there are the bones of a house. Any good designer will tell you that the personalization of a building ought to work with its structure. Have fun, in other words, but don't wreck the place. The year-by-year changes to our culture, in order to make sense, have to relate to the basic tenets and values of the society that hosts the culture. Otherwise, things become random and chaotic. We're seeing that now. Moderates on both sides of the center line are moderate because they understand this. Liberals are always swapping out everything that makes up the presenting surface of the thing, while conservatives focus on preserving the substrate. As long as both sides of the coin are in the mix, human progress will gradually produce an ever better, ever safer quality of life. Steven Pinker of Harvard spent years on his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. It's a tremendous work. It proves that you and I are living in the richest, most peaceful time in all of human history. By every metric, we are living longer, better lives. This was accomplished by billions of interactions between conservatives and liberals, whatever labels they might have worn at the time. I'm not really talking politics here. I'm talking about the tension between two castes of mind. But our own political system was born in a struggle between the adventurous and the cautious. John Adams was a conservative, and Thomas Jefferson a liberal. They were great frenemies who, get this, died on the exact same day, on the 4th of July, on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. How's that for an omen? This dichotomy is also baked into the Judeo-Christian roots of our society. God the Father is a conservative, and Jesus, well, he's a bit of a hippie, isn't he? This contrast between the liberal mind and the conservative mind has been with us always. I've come to understand the concept of the Holy Spirit as that of an overarching sense of goodwill, independent of both Father and Son. But that's for another day. Inside the engine room of any civilization, you will always find change-friendly liberals tinkering with the knobs and sliders, and tradition-conscious conservatives following along behind to restore the factory settings. It's a never-ending process. Eventually, the silliest ideas are lost to history, and the best ones are tailored in such a way that they can serve us all. The push-pull is not a flaw, as they say. It's a feature. My hardline conservative friends will be mad at me for saying this, but it seems obvious that neither side will ever vanquish the other. It seems obvious that neither side should even try to vanquish the other. I'm going to catch hell for saying this, but the job for each is to protect the other from the negative consequences of his or her own habits of mind, and thereby to protect us all. There's an old saying, 2 heads are better than one. I would extend that a little by saying that 2 types of heads are better than one. What sort of perspective can anybody have if he or she carefully avoids the input of people who see the world through a different lens? Tragically, the great country that once utilized both the liberal mind and the conservative mind has been divided into a civil war between the 2 ideologies that attach themselves to these 2 basic human archetypes. Layers of dogma now obscure the useful organic tendencies of liberal humans and conservative humans. What ought to be an ongoing willingness on the parts of both sides to push and pull against their counterparts has devolved into a desire to eradicate their counterparts. What used to be spirited arm wrestling has turned into a knife fight. We'll get into the mechanics of that in future episodes, but for now, let's not digress. You liberals genuinely love new ideas. You're not faking that. But this does leave you open to a lot of crazy detours based on dubious theories. As a default Democrat until 8 years ago, I knew the restlessness of my fellows. Their appetite for the new resulted in a lot of dead ends, or worse. Sometimes my liberal friends are in such a hurry to explore the new road that they overdrive their headlights and end up in a ditch. A conservative, on the other hand, never gets ahead of himself. Sometimes this can make Jack a dull boy. Sometimes a given change actually is a needed adaptation. The conservative never goes off a cliff, but sometimes he forgets to leave the neighborhood at all. Ideally, we should always be influencing one another, not bullying, not silencing, influencing. Allow me to mix metaphors for a minute. If a civilization can be seen as a vehicle within which we traverse our time on Earth, we might see liberals as the accelerator pedal and conservatives as the brakes, and shock absorbers, and shoulder harnesses. Look, it's very frustrating for us conservatives that the culture is so influenced by progressives. We're painfully aware that every minute of every day we are being characterized as greedy warmongers out to enslave the world. There's no cultural understanding of us as defenders of the framework of Western civilization. If you listen to actors accepting awards, you will never hear a nod to the underlying order of a gradually advancing society. Only the leftmost edges of that society are publicly acknowledged, the rubber-stamped notions of the moment. A millionaire actor attacking capitalism, for example, is a dancer calling for the floor to be torn up. Being a conservative is a thankless job. It's our lot in life to be taken for granted. We men and women of the measuring tape and the level and the plumb bob. We hear the band playing. We see the pretty people hurling themselves about on the stage. Culture is not lost on us. But we are somewhat preoccupied with the stage itself. We know that if we've built it right, it will last, but only if we also maintain it, like a house with good bones, being cared for over time. No matter how far out the culture gets, there will always be values to return to. That time is coming soon, dear liberal, and when the current craziness reaches its crescendo, it will be us boring old conservatives who show up with our tools and try to repair the damage. Wouldn't it save a lot of trouble if liberals and conservatives actually sought the influence of one another? Again, I stress that I'm not talking about the hard outer edges of either political ideology. To hell with those people. Really, they're only in it for the adrenaline. They will keep cranking up the volume until somebody cuts their power off. Listen, the cutting edge comes and goes. What seems amazing today will as likely as not look ridiculous in a few years. For some of us, it is really important to be hip. For the rest of us, it's hip to be square. Well, that's enough out of me. If you've gotten something from this video, please send it across the divide to somebody you think it might help, and consider subscribing to this channel to get the whole series. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel and then click the little bell to get notifications.